Hi, everybody. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining us today for our book passage author conversation. My name is Allison Bainbridge. My second favorite thing to do after hosting author events is to travel. I love traveling. And over the years, I've attempted to travel with more intention in recent times to be mindful of the environment, think about the effects on the culture, and enjoy all aspects of the trip. The book at the center of our conversation today, this evening, The Vagabond's Way, is for readers who dream of travel, yearn to get back out on the road, or want to enrich a journey they're currently on. The Vagabond's Way explores and celebrates the life altering essence of travel. Each day of the year features a one-page meditation and an aspect of the journey, anchored by words of wisdom from a variety of thinkers, from Stoic philosopher Seneca and poet Maya Angelou to Trappist monk Thomas Merton and Grover from Sesame Street. Throughout the year, Rolf Potts embraces the ragged edge, harder to quantify aspects of travel that inevitably change travelers' lives for the better in unexpected ways. The book's various sections mirror the phases of a trip. The book encourages you to sustain the mindset of a journey, even when you aren't able to travel, and affirms that travel is as much a way of being as it is an act of movement. Rolf Potts is the author of Vagabonding, an uncommon guide to the art of long-term world travel. His adventures have taken him to 6 continents, and he has reported from more than 60 countries for the Travel Channel, multiple publications. His stories have appeared in numerous literary anthologies as well. He is based in north central Kansas, where he keeps a small farmhouse on 30 acres with his wife. And we earlier we were discussing Kansas, and so maybe he'll impart some perfect things that you want to do if you're traveling through Kansas. To discuss this thought-provoking book with Rolf is producer and journalist Ernest White II. He is the founder and CEO of Presidio Pictures, and executive producer and host of award-winning television travel docuseries Fly Brother with Ernest White, currently airing in the US on PBS stations and Create TV nationwide, and it's also streaming worldwide. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to Rolf Potts and Ernest White.
Thanks for the introduction.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Allison. Rolf, happy to be here with you, man. Thank you for having this conversation with us.
Good to see you. Good to have you back in Kansas, if only virtually.
Yes. And thank you to everybody that's out there watching. And of course, to Book Passage for creating the opportunity for us to have a wonderful conversation. Rolf, my man, we've known each other for a few years now. We've done a couple of projects together, one of which is an episode of Fly Brother with Ernest White II. As Allison was just saying, you enticed me, you lured me to Kansas to spend some time with you and your lovely wife, Kiki, and your parents. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Potts. And so it was, a wonderful experience that we were able to share with our audience. So I just wanted to bring that up so people can go and see you, Rolf, extol the virtues and beauty of Kansas.
I'm a big fan of my home, and it's been a pleasure to host you here, Ernest. Yeah, and it's great to talk with you here tonight. I just so my audience know, Ernest is not just a TV show host. He also has a membership community called Fly Brothers and Friends. I'm on the board of board of directors. And I made a video for that today, and it was so hard, Ernest. It feels like your charisma raises all boats. And so I'm glad to be in conversation with you right now, because if by chance my video for your membership community does not quite hit the mark, it's because I didn't have you on the other end. So it's good to be talking to you tonight.
Likewise, man, and no pressure, obviously, on holding all of the boats. Thank you, man. Well, listen, so one of the things that I think resonates with me with regard to just everything you do as a storyteller and everything you embody is just the idea of the vagabond. And you describe it as a vagabond as being traditionally defined as a person who wanders from place to place without a fixed home. And yet we had the opportunity to spend time with you in your fixed home, Kansas, which sometimes you weren't thinking of it as your fixed home necessarily. Your folks were there, you were raised there, but you were out in the world for a while before coming back. How have you squared the idea of having this fixed home and still embodying the spirit of Vagabond?
Yeah, well, I think I sort of traveled my way into my conception of home. That
Mm.
in a certain sense, I had to go to the other side of the world to feel what home could be. And as you know, I went in on some property with my parents years ago. This was a lesson I didn't learn in Kansas. It's a lesson I learned at the other side of the world, in Egypt, in Vietnam, in Namibia, places where families pool resources. And so one great thing I've learned from travel is family. And in a sense, seeing how other people lived in their homes helped me deepen my own sense for home. And of course, when you came and we did the Fly Brother episode here, it was about meeting my wife in Kansas. My wife who's lived in Europe and is very well traveled herself, and myself, who's been around the world and lived in Asia for a long time. I met her right on the other side of this door. And so it's interesting. You define Vagabond as someone who wanders with no fixed address, but I think one thing I try to promote in the book is the idea that you don't have to end the attitude of travel when you get home. That you can take these soul enriching lessons of travel, including lessons about community, take them home and fold them into your home. And so, like, a vagabond doesn't have to be the guy who is wandering the earth alone until he's age 80, right? A vagabond can be a person who takes the experience of travel into a dynamic experience of home. And my book goes month by month through the progression of travel. December is really about coming home and finding ways to not ever end the journey, to fold those lessons and those inspirations of travel into the home life you have.
Oh, wow, man. I love it already. And would you be able to offer us a little taste of what the Vagabond's Way provides to its readers?
Well, I'll read a little bit of my introduction chapter, just so that people who aren't familiar with the premise of the book can learn a little bit more about it.
Perfect.
And so here it is. At its best, travel is not a flashy black backdrop for our lifestyle ambitions, but an act that touches every aspect of our being. Travel is not a swaggering declaration of self undertaken to impress other people. It is a quiet inquiry, requiring awareness, resilience, and openness to change. Travel is not a hard science that can be cracked open with some algorithmic formula. It is a nuanced art, expressed through joyous, ragged-edged, mindful practice. Travel is not some consumer product you buy into. It is something that you gift to yourself. Over the course of 366 one-page meditations, one for each day of a leap year, the Vagabond's Way mimics the progression of a journey: travel inspiration and planning, getting started on the road, expanding one's comfort zone, learning from the quiet complexities of the journey, and circling back home. As with the journey, these meditations are best approached slowly, one day at a time, reflecting on each day's nuances before moving on to the next. Though this book can technically be read from cover to cover in a few days, it is designed to be taken in incremental doses, in the same manner that one might visit a gym or a dance studio, steadily benefiting from the daily ritual over the course of a year. The Vagabond's Way is about the mindset that can enlarge each day on the road, however long that journey might be. Though some of the historical and literary allusions in these pages refer to travels that span multiple continents over the course of many years, its insights apply as readily to short-term, close-to-home journeys. And while the word vagabond is traditionally defined as, quote, a person who wanders from place to place without a fixed home, as you said, Ernest, this book affirms that travel is as much a way of being as it is an act of movement. Some travel themes reappear in these pages in slightly different form numerous times over the course of a year. Often, these themes reinforce the kinds of issues the travel industry would have us ignore, issues like traveling light, going slow, letting go of rigid plans, staying open to surprise, embracing boredom, celebrating disorientation, shutting off our technology, spending less money, wandering away from tourist zones, looking beyond cultural stereotypes, and developing travel habits that benefit local economies. These thematic repetitions are deliberate and serve as a kind of gentle refrain that encourages the reader to consider and reconsider these travel virtues. At its best, this book will not just explore ideas about mindful travel, it will make you want to travel, and in doing so, to enrich your life in ways you don't yet understand. If midway through reading this book, you fling it aside because it doesn't quite fit into the luggage For a journey you have concluded that you can no longer postpone, it has done its job.
Man, Rolf Potts, The Vagabond's Way. I just am bereft. You leave me verklempt simply because I just feel like you capture the essence of what adventure, what life is about as it relates to travel and in just being out in the world. You've always done that. You've always been inspirational in that way, and I just am excited to see this latest iteration, which is a daily meditation, a daily invitation to going deeper within yourself as you go out into the world, as you engage with other people, be they your neighbors or a stranger on a train or on a plane. And so thank you so much, Rolf, for putting all of this together. What inspired you for this particular book?
Yeah, well, the world of travel as it inspires your own career, Ernest. But actually, this sort of came out of the pandemic. As you know, I met my wife on the deck. We had our first date on this porch during the pandemic. We had to stand 10 feet apart because it was early pandemic and we didn't know how it worked. And we pretty much immediately knew we were right for each other. And so every morning after we decided it was time to be together, we would read to each other on the porch to start the day, to connect with each other, but also to connect with the importance of what each day had in store for us. Yeah. And so we would read like Mary Oliver poems or Ross Gay's Book of Delights, Thich Nhat Hanh's Meditations, also a book called The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday, which sort of created the template for this, which the Daily Stoic has a quote by a Stoic every day and then a meditation or a reflection on that. And I thought the travel world needs this because, I'm sort of an obsessive and a little bit of a nerd. You can see this, Ernest, about travel. And I've been collecting quotes and thoughts about every book I've read about travel, every travel experience I've had for 25 or more years. And I realized I had this wealth of wisdom that's not just my own, but it's like 3,000 years of travelers' wisdom that I can aggregate into one book to sort of help people focus on that more experiential, that more deep dive side of travel that really affects you in a way that goes beyond the bullet pointed list that we see in advertisements about travel. And so that flowed out. And it just flowed right out of me. And I'm really, really happy to have it out in the world.
Well, listen, it is incredibly expansive and deep. That is the thing that kept coming up for me every time I would read a page. It's just like, wow, like you cover so much with regard to travel as a human endeavor and connection as a human endeavor and love as a human endeavor and all of these different things. And you're able to have it be universal and specific at the same time. And that's, again, that's a marvel to me. How did you end up deciding which quotes to use? And then how did you go about researching or even devising or divining how you wanted to go deeper based on whatever quotes you used?
Well, that was the question. And, in keeping all these quotes, I kept what is known as a commonplace book. And this is something that goes back to the aristocrats of the Renaissance, where if you were Da Vinci, Da Vinci kept a commonplace book. Thomas Jefferson kept a commonplace book. You didn't have as much access to books, let alone the internet back then. So if you read something interesting, you would copy it down into your commonplace book. Well, I had a Mac Classic computer in the 1990s where I first started copying down these quotes because I was afraid I would forget them. And so for 25 years, I've been saving my quotes in different categories. It's just like, wow, borders are a really interesting place. When you cross a border from one nation to another, something special happens. When you haggle in a market, when you're not used to when you're used to fixed prices and you're haggling for prices, that's an experience too. So over the years, I subcategorized all these things and I realized that I really covered a breadth of human experience that travel inspires in us. And some of them are ethical issues, like how soon should you start taking photos when you walk into a village? And other things are experiential, like even the inspiration to travel. I think a lot of what I talk about is permission. Sometimes we have the wherewithal to travel, but we haven't given ourselves permission to do it. I also talk a lot about attention because travel forces us into a new kind of attention. And at its best, we bring that attention back home when we see our home in a brand new way. So yeah, I poured out 3,000 years of travel readings over the course of 25 years and my own experiences. And that's The Vagabond's Way.
Okay, man. So I have to admit that the idea of you keeping all of these on a Mac is less romantic than my idea of keeping them all in a shoebox, but on little scraps of paper. But hey, as long as we get the goods, and in this case, the goods are in this one tome, I guess we're all coming out ahead. So, what are some of your favorite quotes that you've come across that's maybe stand out? I know all of them are, but any particular ones that resonate with
Well, anyone who's read my book Vagabonding knows that I'm a big fan of Walt Whitman.
you? Mm.
Walt Whitman, who I think published his first edition of Leaves of Grass in the 1850s, but it feels like he's sitting across from you and looking you in the eye and talking to you as a kindred spirit. And in fact, when I asked my wife to marry me, I basically plagiarized Walt Whitman. I said, Kiki, give me your hand. I give you my love more precious than money. Will you come travel with me? Shall we stick together as long as we live? And then, so I think the Song of the Open Road, if my tombstone is big enough, I just want the whole thing put on there. Walt Whitman's great travel poem, Song of the Open Road, because it's so basically, what's that quote? There's so many good quotes. Actually, he says, "From this moment forth, we ask not good fortune, for we are good fortune." Oh my gosh. That's all about permission. It's just like, we're not asking for good luck. We're going to manifest good luck. We're not asking for a life-changing journey. We're going to live one. And we don't even know what it looks like yet, but we have faith that it's going to touch our lives in ways we can't even understand yet.
Wow, goosebumps. I mean, honestly, like it's really just being the party yourself. You don't have to show up to the party, just be the party. Just be the adventure, just be the romance, and just be all of these things that you may think are outside of you, but no, they're already in you. And giving yourself
willing to giving
go
yourself
ahead.
permission giving yourself permission, sorry to interrupt, but also to make mistakes, because I think we dream of travel as this perfectly sealed, pie in the sky dream. And then after 1 week of feeling out of place and not knowing the language at all, and maybe paying too much for dinner, then we feel bad. But actually, that's part of the learning process, that travel it makes us a kid again. It makes us a child again. Like, we don't really know the vocabulary of the place we are. We're not really sure how to cross the street. We're not really sure how to do this. And so we're in this really open-hearted state. And part of what being good fortune is knowing that it's imperfect. Like all things in life, your travel experience is imperfect, but you are, to use a phrase I've used around you before, Ernest, riding tall in the saddle, and you are taking life head on.
Yes, indeed. Just a reminder to, sit up straight. But as I'm here in this conversation, but absolutely, man, taking ownership, and again, giving yourself permission to be out in the world and to fall, to trip, to slip. That reminds me of an experience I had. I was in Cuba trying to pretend like I was not American, trying not to be, seen, if you will. And I accidentally slipped on some poop that was on the ground. And the 4-letter word that escaped my lips was not in Cuban Spanish. And so, and I just had to be all right with having my cover blown so dramatically and flamboyantly at once. So,
how is your Cuban Spanish? Your Brazilian Portuguese is fantastic.
Thank you. I've never had any complaints about my Cuban Spanish. That's what I can say. But they may not have. They may have just like, he's trying. So I appreciate that as well.
Well, one thing I will say is that I envy your language proficiency. And I spent a beautiful month in Cuba, and my Spanish was horrible. So I didn't slip and poop. I'll give you that, Ernest. But just to encourage people who haven't given themselves permission to travel yet,
Yes.
or who are surrounded by people who are sort of naysayers. Well, actually, you can get by. Learn a few simple phrases. And actually, classroom Spanish doesn't do you a lot of good in Cuba, because it's so Caribbean. The Spanish there is so Caribbean.
Yes.
So that's another part of the permission. And I'm a walking testament to this. I mean, you're great with languages, Ernest, but I'm horrible at languages, yet I've traveled a lot. And I'm riding tall in the saddle, and I've learned to say hello, sorry, how much is this, in many different world languages. And it's been a blessing. I've been a fool many times, but language is not my gift as it is with yours, Ernest, but I haven't used it as an excuse. And it's been a blessing to go to places like Cuba and try.
Absolutely, Rolf. And fool is nothing. I would never use that word when describing you, other than you fooled you when you mentioned that you were about to get married, and I was only saying that from the bottom of my heart. But listen, man, I have been places where the only thing I could say was "please, thank you," and "where's the bathroom?"
Mm.
And I think people just were happy that I was even trying to say those basics in the local language. My accents are really good. My grammar is always Tarzan-like. So don't let the rolled R's fool you. I'm not getting my R's and L's twisted there. So in thinking about the arrangement of the Vagabond's Way, the Vagabond's Way, thinking about the way the book is structured and organized, you've got several themes going on, one of which is why and how to travel. What are some of your most salient, not only quotes, but points and stories that you tell in that category?
Well, I touched really early on the idea of time wealth, on the idea
Mm,
of that of all the things we can surround ourselves, of all the objects we can surround ourselves in life, we don't really own them as much as we own our time. We're all born equally rich in time, and we
mm,
sort of have to walk through the world in such a way that we can give ourselves the time to live our dreams. And I'm not saying that everybody is going to be a traveler or dreams of travel, but a lot of people do. And I talk to a lot of them. And so sometimes the key to actualizing that time wealth isn't throwing money at it, but again, giving yourself permission, figuring out ways that you can travel in local economies that basically instead of paying the expensive $200 commercial hotel, you're paying 15 bucks a night for the same hotel that people in Mozambique sleep in, and you're feeding into the local economy. And so from the very beginning, I quote philosophers and social scientists and all sorts of people to basically encourage the idea this is your one life. Think about it. If you dream of travel, it's not as hard as you might think. And I bring up the idea of memento mori, which sounds morbid, but the idea of remember death,
mm.
because our days are limited. We can't put off our truest lives forever. Um, and maybe Ernest, you've been in a similar situation for me. I know in your early travels were funded by throwing luggage on airplanes, right? Um,
Uh, Yes, that was true. I had a part-time gig at an airport that allowed me the not only the time but the flight benefits to get around the world very inexpensively. And so you're right. I mean, there's really no excuse as long as you make it a priority. You can do it.
Yeah, you find ways. I stocked shelves in grocery stores when I was young. I mowed lawns in the greater Seattle area. And there's people in Florida where you came up, or in Kansas at the Pacific Northwest where I spent time when I was young, who had a lot more resources.
Yes,
But it's sort of realizing that you use what money you have to take that time and feed it into the life that you want to live. And so really the first section, it covers a lot of different things about inspiration of travel. But I think a core philosophy of that first month in the Vagabonding Way is about time wealth, and just realizing that if time is your wealth, then you just use what money you have to make that dream trip be as extravagant or simple as you can make it.
absolutely. And I think that's something that people don't really think about, which is you can always get more money. You may not know how, but you can't get more time.
Mm.
So that's, when you look at which resource is more precious, and someone had to say that to me at the right time when I was able to receive it. But we're saying it now for all you amazing folks at home that you can always get more money, you can't get more time, and now is the time to do it. And by the way, everybody, you can drop questions in the comment section. We would love to answer any questions you might have about The Vagabond's Way, Rolf Potts' latest wonderful book of meditations, 366 meditations on travel and life and amazing experiences around the world. So thank you again for everyone for being here, and Rolf, thank you for being here, and Book Passage, thank you. So I think this is a good segue into the idea of status versus experience. And we know that people often, and especially now with social media being what it is, Instagram, which did not exist when you and I first started traveling, there's the idea of status was always there, but it's easier to kind of lord it over people than before. versus experience. How do you speak to that in the book?
Well, I talk about this in the history, in the context of the history of travel, because for years, your average folk in the village couldn't travel. It was an aristocratic act. And
Hmm.
so aristocrats traveled and they talked very loudly about their travels when they got home because it was conspicuous consumption. And of course, there's been some great travel writing that came out of the aristocratic class around the world, from England to Japan and points beyond. But it feels like, especially when travel sort of pivoted and became a mass phenomena in the 19th century, when middle class people could travel, their way of pretending to be rich was to travel and talk about it. And it comes to this day. I think travel and status will always be interwoven in a way that's complicated, and it happens on Instagram too. And I'm guilty, Ernest. I know that
Of course.
I look better in my Instagram photos than I do in an average day. I'm sure you do too, right? But those are the travels that we're performing, and it's fine. I think people will always perform their travels, but the way travel can really touch you is those quiet moments when you're not in front of your smartphone, when you're
Mm-hmm.
not thinking about the souvenir that you're going to hang on your wall to impress your friends. But it's going to be those moments where you just think, I am humbled. I met someone who makes a fraction of the money I met, and he taught me a lesson about family or love or work, and I am going to weave this into my being. And it's those moments that affect you in no way. No Instagram post or fancy souvenir could affect you. I talk about, actually, in a different book, Souvenir, I talk about meeting souvenir vendors in Namibia, and I know you spent time in Namibia.
Yeah.
And I was sort of asking them about the souvenirs they were selling. Sort of the subtext was like, how do you settle for just selling souvenirs? And the souvenir vendor is like, no, this is love. This is
Mm-hmm.
love for my family. My kids and my wife are living better lives up in the mountains. They're from the Damara people. And it's like, I do this of love. This is, for me, is not work, because this is inseparable from the love it is. And it's like, if only your average American could talk to this souvenir vendor who's making pennies to what we make. And the idea that he manifests his work as love, that's something you can't put on Instagram. That's something that doesn't raise your status. It just humbles you. And I think those are the best travel moments.
My goodness, man. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I think both of us who talked about how blessed we feel to continue to have these kinds of experiences, to have had innumerable experiences where we've engaged with people who materially have much less than we ever could, and that they'll ever have, but at the same time just have such a phenomenal understanding of humanity, of love, of connection, of fellowship and community. And they've let us in. They've engaged with us in a way that allows us to take that energy back with us and do the same thing, do what they've been doing. And so when I think of status versus experience, that's what I think about, is the experience. Yes, I travel and tell as well. I mean, yeah, there you get the dopamine rush, but at the same time, really, like you said, it's sometimes it's these sunsets, it's the conversations, it's the love affairs, it's what the great meals that in someone's mom's kitchen, like it's all of those things that really make it worthwhile to me. That make even struggling through airport security and testing for whatever is the next thing, and all of the hurdles that get thrown up, for those of us who are blessed to travel with strong passports and strong and physical ability and all of those other things, that privileges that we often take for granted, but it's going beyond that. It's really seeking that connection. So again, thank you for describing it and providing the opportunity for us to continue to engage with that on a daily basis.
Yeah, travel makes you feel privileges you never felt when you're at home. Suddenly you're in another place, and it's like, actually, our plumbing just went out in the house here in Kansas. Not having indoor plumbing for a week made us really feel that water in a new way. I think you come home and you get a perspective on how accidentally wasteful your life has been. And actually you become a host. I mean, one of my great travel pleasures is hosting you in Kansas, Ernest. You really learn how to be a host. You learn you learn just the wonderful miracle that hosting somebody is when you are hosted on the other side of the world. And as a Florida guy, I think you'll appreciate this. I write about it in the Vagabond's Way. The first time I went to Key West, Florida, I was standing down by Duval, in the tourist area of Key
Wall
West.
Street.
Sun went down and everybody started clapping. And it just blew me away. I was 23 years old, and it's like, they clap for the sunset here. And I sort of internalized that little Florida experience. And I mean, we often stop to look at the sunset. We take pictures of it. Maybe we put them on Instagram, but just that gratitude, just feeling that gratitude. And if not physically, then mentally clapping for these moments of beauty that we are privileged to witness. It's a travel one virtue. And it's something I try to bring home with me.
Oh man, and I am so glad that you mentioned the G word, because I was thinking as you were talking about your plumbing experience, I had the smile on my face because I was thinking about how grateful I would be when that water returned. It probably ovation worthy.
Oh my God. It's just, you forget how much of your life revolves around being able to pour a glass of water from the tap, being able to use the toilet in a normal way.
Yes.
And we've all been in travel situations where that is much more complicated. And maybe having traveled, spending time in the Himalayas with no plumbing for a week made the time in Kansas with no plumbing for a week seem pretty easy. So yeah, again, you really feel these privileges that we enjoy here.
Absolutely, absolutely, man. And so, in thinking about that, and thinking about other themes that you kind of have outlined in the book, what travel teaches you is something that kind of stood out. And you talk about our over dependency on mediocre now brain. What is mediocre now brain? And what does travel teach us in addition to the perspective that you just spoke about?
Well, I actually learned that phrase from a woman who was interviewing me for her podcast, and she was paraphrasing something I'd said in Vagabonding, and she came up with that phrase, and I immediately said, I love that. I'm going to use it in my next book.
Sure.
Mediocre now brain. Basically, it's like we all dream about travel from home. We all look at the world through our computer screens, through our books, through the TV shows like Fly Brother with Ernest White II, right? But then while we are dreaming about travel, we're still in our mediocre now brain. We are not yet in that place where travel is teaching us by those mistakes we make, and by going to that place on our bucket list and realizing there's a giant line outside the Louvre and just sort of following that smell to the patisserie that's around the corner and spending the afternoon there instead. So your mediocre now brain that is inspired and anticipating the travels is not as smart as the traveler you will be one day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year into your journey, however long it is. And if you trust that future smart brain is going to be superior to your mediocre now brain, then that's something to really look forward to as a traveler, that every step you take on the road, each day you have, even the bad experiences, are going to make you a better traveler and a more experienced person on the road.
Yes, but the yin and the yang, and no sun without rain. I think we are learning that more and more and more and more. And certainly one of the ways to hasten that understanding is traveling. But I'm happy to always be jerked out of the mediocre now brain as often as possible by my friends like you, who are just like, oh my bad, we need to be engaged.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and it's fun. Yeah, again, not to come back to you visiting me here in Kansas, but being a host allows you to see your home in a new way. You see what catches people's eye. Having guests in a home allows them to jar you out of your mediocre now brain. It's like all of a sudden, it's like, oh, really? Yeah, that is interesting. I ignore that every day. And here's my friend visiting me from the other side of the country. So, yeah, no, I love just sort of challenging your mediocre now brain into these wonderful, humble lessons of future that a journey can provide.
Yes, man. Yes. And you just reminded me of the time, when I first got there. So I think I visited you in Kansas maybe twice. And just in thinking of how multicultural the area was and the history, Negro Leagues baseball, and talking with Phil Dixon and talking with Rod Pokawachet, the filmmaker, representing indigenous communities in Wichita. And you not only have wonderful relationships with these people, but you know the history as well, in a way that was, again, deeply impressive. And so that made the experience for me. You weren't just trying to get me to come to this place based on like, okay, yeah, I'm going to make up something, or I'm going to overplay or overblow what the place has to offer. I feel like you were a wonderful representative because you've been observant and because you've been listening. And I think those are two key aspects of being, ways of being that you highlight frequently in the Vagabond's way. Are there any, again, passages or stories that come up for you with regard to just the listening and the observing aspects of travel?
Well, you'll appreciate this, Ernest, because you're the son of teachers, as I am, and teachers have superpowers in a way because their job is to instill curiosity in young people. And
Mm,
the first time I hosted my parents in a really immersive travel experience was in Beijing. And the parental role was reversed. Like I was the expert, I was the travel guy. I had learned those simple phrases to get us around. And so in a way that they were novices, but curiosity was a superpower. As teachers and just as good folks, hi, mom and dad. I know they're watching the stream out there someplace,
I love
but
it.
they were able, it made me realize that you don't have to be an expert. Like as travelers, we're all outsiders in a foreign place. And
Mm,
sometimes we pretend to be better travelers than others. Oh, we're travelers and they're tourists. My parents, they knew that they weren't from Beijing, but they would ask questions. And of course, Chinese people have a lot of respect for older folks. You know, they had gray hair at the time.
yeah.
And in a way, the Chinese people were more interested in my parents because it's not every day that their neighborhood had a couple of people. This was a long time ago. They were in their 60s, walking through their street. And so it was so cool to get a travel lesson from my parents who were using their passport for maybe the second time. I had all
Mm,
these stamps on my passport, traveling with my parents who had weaponized curiosity. But basically, they didn't know a lot, but they asked a lot and they were engaged in everything. And that taught me a humbling lesson. At a time when I had some pretty impressive bylines as a travel writer, I took my parents out on a road and sort of using that curiosity that they had tried to instill in their students. And I know your parents did the same thing, Ernest. They really showed that that's such a great tool to have as traveler. And people respect that. People respect asking just a simple, dumb question in their neighborhood because most people aren't asked, aren't presented with curiosity about their corner of the universe. And so it's just, thanks, mom and dad. That was a great thing to learn in Beijing from them.
oh, yes. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Potts, for raising this young man to go out and represent you well in the world. And I think absolutely, I mean, it's that curiosity that helps people to feel seen and empowered and loved. You know, you're asking them about themselves, you're expressing interest. And certainly it's about doing so humbly, without communicating that about what they're, the answer before they begin to answer the question. And I think that's a challenge sometimes for people. They may ask a question, but it's implied in the way they show up that they already know better than you. Whereas, it's really about recognizing that you don't know, that we don't know when we show up in these places. We may read up about it. We may have had experiences in certain elements of a fraction of what the possibilities could be, but we never know. And so it's always nice to just come from that place of humble curiosity. I'm not going to say ignorance, but yeah, humble curiosity. And so, yeah, man, were you going to say something else on that?
Well, there's just, I quote, I think a Zen monk from 800 years ago. He says, "Not knowing is most intimate." That basically, I'm not gonna get this story perfect, but one monk visits another monk in a monastery in China, and he's asked some big philosophical question. He says, "I don't know," and the master says, "Very good. Not knowing is most intimate." That basically admitting what we don't know and improving ourselves by engaging in that not knowing
Sure.
is something that will improve us as in our home lives, but in travel, unless we're coming to terms with that not knowing and pushing past it and deepening our knowledge of a place, then we're cheating ourselves out of experience.
Yes, absolutely. One last question from me before we open it up to the floor. We have several questions that have come in, and we will be getting to those momentarily. But briefly, in talking about that knowing and knowledge and having access to information now more than ever before in the history of humanity, at least this go round, we have all this access and information at our fingertips. Not sure that everybody always utilizes that access. But, when we were coming along, we had books, we had guidebooks, we had, encyclopedias, we had like actual things in hand to access. But now we've got all this technology. We've got all of these different virtual experiences that are coming closer and closer to being reality. We've got augmented reality. We've got technology that keeps us engaged with it sometimes more than with the environment that we're experiencing at that moment. How do we balance this technology as we go forward?
Well, Ernest, there's no silver bullet. I admit that. I admit in the book, I try to
Yes.
gently discourage people from overdependence on technology, because we often navigate our lives through our phones these days. Some people could be watching this on their phone right now. And that phone in the pocket, you and I came up in the paper guidebook era. Well, now you have, your phone isn't just your guidebook, but it tells you the temperature, and it has a map to show you where to go. It has all these tools. It has, maybe it can help you translate Portuguese or Spanish if you don't speak it as well as Ernest White II. And so the problem is that if you're navigating too much of your travels through your phone, that's a home-driven habit. We see so much of the world through our phones at home. Why would we go to the other side of the world and then be looking at our phone all the time? It's tough because I use my phone quite a bit too. But there was this idea when virtual realities first came around. It's like, well, you can experience the world without leaving your home. Well, now it's like you cannot leave your home while experiencing the world. You can basically be sending the same silly text to your same silly friends, looking at your same social media friends, trying to find, to crowdsource. You're using your phone to crowdsource a restaurant instead of just looking for a crowd. There's a chapter in the book about this. I was in Bukit Indonesia, on the island of Sumatra, and I wanted to have rendang, which is this great, local Minangkabau dish. And I went to TripAdvisor, I think, and I found a restaurant. And I went there, and it had great reviews, but they were all tourist bus reviews, and the tourist bus wasn't there yet. And so the rendang was okay, but not great. I realized I'd walked through a market full of Bukit natives having the time of their lives, eating at the market. And it's like, I crowdsourced when I should have looked for a crowd. There was a literal human crowd in the street eating food, and I crowdsourced it through my phone. So if in doubt, fall back on those old human things. Be willing to be lonely and lost and a little bit bored, and to follow your smell to the good restaurant, to follow a crowd to a good restaurant instead of following an app recommendation. And again, it's easier said than done. And I think some, Gen Z people will think, oh my gosh, that sounds really weird. And I don't mean to knock using your phone, but it's just like, if you can discipline yourself to walk that fine edge between how your phone and technology can help you versus how it can hinder you. Maybe spend a day where you just keep your phone in your room. You use a paper map to walk around a new place.
Yeah.
And just push your comfort zone in ways that sort of push technology to the side in a way that can enhance your travels.
Wow, what an interesting challenge. And that's something that I think that might show up sooner than later within our community, Fly Brother and Friends, and possibly some future episodes of Fly Brother. Just the idea of leaving your phone and going out in the world with a map, asking questions, committing to asking people where is a great place to have lunch, and doing that, and following their recommendation, and letting it be okay if you don't even like it, but getting into the habit again of using your other senses and not having to, including your sense or the ability to communicate and talk and say, hi, I'm new here, and wondering if you can give me a suggestion or a recommendation. Thank you.
This could be a good challenge for the Fly Brother and Friends community. For people who join Fly Brother and Friends, I think we should have a special challenge where, instead of spending 30 minutes looking at all the restaurant options, spend 15 minutes learning the local phrase for where's a good place to eat. Then go ask someone who looks like they live there and is well fed.
Yes.
I like this idea.
No, I love it, man. We will definitely expand upon that. So I'm excited about that possibility. I don't know if people, when I am on my phone, by the way, to
Right.
take this, to have this conversation, just because of some tech issues here. But I do have access to the wonderful questions that we have come through from some of our audience members, and I am going to ask you right now. Tu Yang asks, Rolf, do you have any advice for someone leaving their country for the first time soon? And this person is in North America, and they're wondering about any advice you might have um, for them if they're leaving their country for the first time.
Well, most advice is have fun. It's going to blow your mind and make you nervous and give you a little bit of anxiety. I actually write a chapter about culture shock and how culture shock is a good thing. First time I properly left the country, I went to Korea, and man, I felt this anxiety. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I felt a little anxiety. I wasn't used to the manner system, the rules, what was normal.
Mm.
I wasn't used to being out of place. I'm a white American dude. I've been walking down streets my whole life, being in a crowd of people who look kind of like me, and suddenly I was in Korea and I wasn't that way. I felt anxious, not just for other reasons. I didn't really know the rules of how things worked, but that culture shock was such a good gift. And so what I'll say is, one, you're gonna have a lot of fun. Two, know that culture shock is a thing and you'll feel bad sometimes. But man, that is the door, that culture shock is going to throw the doors open to experiences that you have no idea were going to be amazing. And so,
Okay.
yeah, enjoy it. Use that passport. Slow down. Don't try to do too much, because I think sometimes the best parts of being in another culture outside of your own are just sitting on the street and watching the street go by, smelling the air and how it's different. And one of my big phrases is walk until your day becomes interesting. So give yourself permission when you leave your country to sort of walk around and slow down in a quotidian way, and like go to the convenience store and see, if it's Japan, what kind of sweets do they sell there? How are they different? Does this one look weird? Yeah, I'll spend a couple of yen on this and buy it and eat it. And just realize that those differences can be intimidating sometimes, but they're also a mystery to be solved. And they're part of the fun of going to another culture. So I envy you, because my first time to another country was life changing.
It's amazing. In my case, my first time in another country was many, many moons ago. And to be able to get back to that feeling of the newness of everything, that again, sense of adventure and of exploration that happens when you've left your environment for the first time. And yes, the anxiety, because like you said, like it's you're not always going to feel good at all. But I think when you decide you're going to lean into the fun of even that, the thrill, that's wonderful advice, Rolf. Thank you so much, and I do believe that I hope that that's useful for you, Tzu Yang. Robert Goheya asks, is there somewhere inside the US that you wish people would take the time to visit? Is there someplace inside the US that you wish more people would take the time to visit? I think I already know what the answer is going to be.
Well, Ernest knows that I love my home state. I love Kansas. It never ranks super high on the top 10 lists of things to do in the United States. I often talk to Europeans who spent more time in Florida or California or New York than me, but it feels like visiting Kansas would be another planet. There's actually a lot of places that are off the tourist trail. We give lip service to getting off the beaten path, but we're usually pretty close to the beaten path. So yeah, I can preach Kansas. You can watch the Fly Brother episode where I hang out with Ernest and some of my friends and colleagues in Kansas. But even the metaphorical Kansas, that place that isn't where people normally go. I mean, in Thailand, you might go to Isan, like that's the northeast, that's the agricultural northeastern part of Thailand, where tourists don't go as much, and people take much more interest in you if you're not the 100th tourist they've seen today, right? So I would say any place in the Great Plains. I'll give my little plug for Kansas. I love the place. It's also a place that you can see as a mystery to be solved. It's like, okay, this town has 277 people in it. Let's see what they do for fun here. That basically, if you take that curiosity to even a little windswept town in the Great Plains, it's a good place to visit it. But I've been to places in Inland Valley, California. I've been in upstate New York. I have been in the panhandle of Oklahoma and the panhandle of Idaho. And it's just cool to go to places that other people don't. Not to show off and to show how I'm, a more daring traveler, but to just go and think, this place is in no guidebooks, and I'm gonna see what this is all about. And again, this isn't about the US, but my wife Kiki has Norwegian family, and they took us around Norway to places that were special to them. It was like their Kansas in Norway.
Mhm.
They were not guidebook places, but man, we had fun. We just had the greatest time hiking through the forest, staying in cabins, going to the local logging museum, going to the local like American hot car and rock and roll museum in this part of Norway, and it was great.
Hot car and rock and roll museum.
Yeah, no, they have all these. There's this down in Sørumsand in Norway. If you're ever in that part of the country, they have a car club with like 200 post World War II American cars that have been preserved, and they're building like a Happy Day style diner there, and it's like seeing 50s Americana through Norwegian eyes. It's not in the guidebook. It blew my mind, and so in a way, I use Kansas as a metaphor to think, well, what parts of this place do people overlook, and how can I embrace that part of the country? And so find the Kansas of any corner of the place you're in, United States included. And gosh, it's a place that's not interesting, but it's a place where people are interested. They're not just trying to sell you things. They're not just trying to put you into this restaurant that has more tourists than that restaurant, but it's like, you're not from here, are you? Let's have a conversation. And so I love that. Good question.
Yeah, and I love the idea that the people are showing you what they enjoy, what they're proud of, what they want to show off, and that's a beautiful feeling too, when people are passionate about the little egg that they think is special, and you're just like, ooh, that's like, even if it's nothing that grand or thrilling, I just really feel cared for, just by virtue of them showing me something that means a lot to them. So thank you for mentioning that. And also thank you for representing upstate New York, the Adirondacks, one of my favorite places, of course, after Kansas.
And both of them are on your season of Fly Brother, right? Season
Both,
2.
both are on the current season of Fly Brother, season
Yeah.
2. Thank you. So Emma Morrill asks, what advice do you have for people who have traveled a lot? How do we keep it magical? How do we not become complacent? How can we constantly evolve and progress the way we travel? Great question.
That's a great question. And actually, I'm going to say something, but Ernest, I'm curious to know your thoughts too, because
Okay.
you're a person who has had a travel-centric life for a long time. I think one is just slowing down. One is tied into the question I just had. Find out, where have I not gone? Where is the provinces here? Where can I go to a town where the tourist buses don't go? And another thing too is to come home. I think a lot of travelers love travel and they're exhausted, but they don't want to quit traveling because each day is special. And it's like, well, maybe coming home will not just allow you to take that attitude home, but it'll allow you to become a little bit thirsty for the travels that are yet to come. And so, yeah, I think it's just sort of sewing together the idea of home and the idea of travel in together that in such a way that you can't really tease them apart. They have this phrase called digital nomads. In fact, probably a lot of the people listening right now are digital nomads. I talk with a lot of digital nomads, which is about taking your career to another part of the world, maybe a more interesting or warm or cheap part of the world, and working remotely from the other side of the world. But I think there's also the inversion where you take those lessons that you've learned in distant places and bring them home, and suddenly you are a dynamic part of that home community. You get a thirst for travel. You talk about your own travels in such a way that you're a witness to the world. If there's an item in the news, I'm always talking about Syria because 20 years ago I had a great experience there, and I saw the humanity of Syria in such a way that at home I can be a witness to the wonderful Syrians of all stripes I met in Syria. In fact, some of the people I met in Syria were Sudanese refugees. I heard some gospel music coming out of a church. I walked in, and it's like, gospel music, this sounds like the US. And it's like, they're Sudanese refugees, and they spoke multiple languages. They were travelers. We call them refugees, but they were travelers too. And I think it was so interesting to see the way that they had internalized unwilling travel. They were war refugees in a country that itself went into war later, but they were living it was a church, so they lived in very spiritual lives, but very engaged lives, and
Mhm.
they were learning from their environment in a way that I found humbling. And so, yeah, just find ways to continue to be humbled, find ways to slow down, find ways to go places that you don't know your way around necessarily, but then come home, take those lessons home, give back to home in the home community, and then let your experience of home make you thirsty for further horizons.
Oh man, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Yes, I have traveled a lot as well. And at one point, I mean, I hit travel fatigue where it was just like, how many more amazing experiences can I have? Right. Because they were coming so fast and so often that they lost their meaning. They lost that specialness, that magic. It was just like, and that's not fair to the place. It's not fair to me. It's not fair to you and the folks that are waiting there and wanting you to have an experience of presence. And so I think absolutely going home and not doing as much certainly helps. And then just remember traveling with intention. Just saying, I'm going to have fun today. I'm going to be present. I am going to leave my phone in the room as I go out today and see what happens. And I think that's probably a great strategy if you're returning to places that you've been to several times. I have an upcoming trip to New York. That's always an interesting place, but I really am going to leave my phone in the room one of those days and just go out there. It's a great practice location for untethering, right? And also recognize I don't have to take a picture of every single thing. So it's giving yourself the permission also to chill out, to not have to see everything. I think will allow those magic moments to organically show themselves. Um, thank you, Rolf, and thank you, Emma, for the question. And finally, we've got two. Oh, Ms. Susan Ivers. She said, came to tonight's talk to keep the wandering spirit alive when not traveling. Any further thoughts? And then she also says, her public television channel, Chicago's WTTW, has started airing Fly Brother. Hearing your intelligence through this talk, I'll start watching and reading the book too, of course. So thank you, Ms. Susan Ivers, for watching Fly Brother and for purchasing and reading The Vagabond's Way. Rolf, our last question of the evening. How does one keep the wandering spirit alive when not traveling?
Well, there's a lot of ways to do it, including watching Fly Brother with Ernest White II, joining his Fly Brother membership community, and having an initiative where we send you out on the road without a phone.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ways. I mean, and this is cool. Like for my birthday a year ago, my wife took me to eat Korean food in Junction City, Kansas, because she knows I love Korean food. After 2 years in Korea, Korea is my comfort food. And it was so fun to engage. We didn't go far. We didn't go to Korea. Someday I'll take her to Korea. We went to Junction City, Kansas, which is this military town. And the Korean food wasn't super authentic, but the portions were big because it was young soldiers who were eating it, right? And it was so interesting to see Korea through military base eyes in Junction City, Kansas. And so, food is a great way to keep that wanderlust, that thirst for travel alive. Basically, any immigrant community in your hometown is going to give you a window into their world, and they're going to be interested in your interest in them, right? So yeah, there's a lot of mediated ways, including Fly Brother with Ernest White II, that we can experience other parts of the world. There's your Instagram feed. There's all sorts of inspirational things. But I think that in-person stuff go to a Pakistani cricket game, go to a Vietnamese restaurant, and taste the other side of the world for an afternoon. And that's a great way to whet that travel appetite and be happy in your home.
And can I just say one last thing, Allison, before you wrap it up? And thank you, Rolf, for that. Just to piggyback on that, music. When you go to these, ask them like, "What's your favorite singer? What's a song? What's a song or an album that you like?" That's another great way, of course, film and television as well. There's a lot of wonderful media out there that can give you that vicarious travel experience. Thank you so much, Rolf. It was phenomenal chatting with you as always. And Ms. Allison, please. Back to you.
Thank you guys so much. This was delightful. I loved it. I could have just listened to you for hours. I guess we'll have to just tune in to Fly Brothers, and of course, read the book. I want to encourage everybody to purchase a copy of the book. You can do it at Book Passage, either come into our store, or if you live too far away, you can call us and order it. You can order it over the website. We will get it to you however you want. We'll have copies available to send out, and this is a great gift item. At the bookstore, we're always setting up gift tables for the holidays, and we're getting close, guys. So this is one of those perfect gift books that will be in our travel gift section. So thank you for this. And I love the questions today, by the way, too. Great questions. And of course, wonderful answers. And just to add, something that I love to do is read books on travel, not just, you know, not just reading for fiction or whatever, but reading travel logs, reading short stories about travel. And there's so many wonderful things to read. So when I'm in between trips, I will often pick up a book for somewhere that I'm interested in going. And it's a wonderful way to armchair travel. So thank you guys so much again for being here. Look forward to seeing what's next, and look forward to seeing you on Fly Brothers.
Thanks a lot, Allison.